My name is Elena Brooks. I was 36 years old the night my husband pulled his SUV onto the shoulder of a dark service road, unlocked my door, and told me to get out. He said it very quietly, which somehow made it worse. Maybe a long walk in the rain will help you remember how to speak to me. I remember the exact way his hand rested on the steering wheel when he said it. Relaxed, casual. Like this was not a marriage breaking open in real time, but a small correction. A lesson. Something deserved. For a second, I just looked at him. We had been married 11 years. Less than 2 hours earlier, we had been sitting under soft amber lights at a private anniversary dinner in a restaurant downtown, with a folded cream menu, a silver candle holder between us, and a waiter who called me ma'am with the careful tone people use in expensive places. I had worn a navy dress I bought myself 3 years ago and kept in perfect condition because Daniel liked that sort of thing, things that looked expensive without seeming obvious. There had been a thin gold chain at my throat, rain already misting against the restaurant windows, and a small white box beside his plate that turned out not to be a gift at all, just a pair of cufflinks he had bought for himself and wanted me to admire. That was how the evening had gone. That was how most things went with Daniel. From the outside, he was the kind of man people trusted immediately. He was polished without trying too hard. He had a soft public voice, a good watch, the right kind of handshake, and a way of making even selfishness sound reasonable. People said he was disciplined, strategic, protective, a provider. I heard all of that for years. At home, what he really was took longer to explain. But that night on the roadside, I did not explain anything. I did not argue. I did not ask if he was serious. By then, I knew better than to waste emotion on moments that were already revealing themselves. I picked up my bag. The interior light came on when I opened the door, and for one strange second I saw us reflected faintly in the window glass. Me in navy silk, hair pinned low at the nape of my neck, one heel already touching wet gravel. Him dry, composed, looking straight ahead. There are moments in life when humiliation is so complete it becomes almost clarifying. That was one of them. If you have ever had a moment like that, where someone showed you exactly who they were because they thought you had nowhere else to go, you already understand more than I need to say. I stepped out without another word. The air smelled like wet asphalt and summer storm water. The road was nearly empty. To my left was a shuttered fuel station with its sign half lit in blue. To my right was a long stretch of black pavement disappearing into trees. My heel slipped slightly on loose stone. I steadied myself with one hand on the door frame. Daniel finally looked at me then. I can still hear the last thing he said before he drove away. Maybe next time you'll think before embarrassing me in public. Then the door shut, the tires pushed water off the road, and his taillights disappeared into the dark. I stood there for a few seconds listening to the sound of the engine fade. I did not cry. That part matters, not because crying would have made me weak, but because by then I was already past shock. There is a stage after confusion and before freedom where you become very still inside. You stop reaching for the version of someone you kept hoping would return. You stop translating cruelty into stress, or pressure, or bad timing, or misunderstanding. You just see it. And once you see it clearly, a lot of things begin to line up. I slipped my phone out of my bag and checked the screen. The recording was still running. I had started it 7 minutes earlier, while he was still in the driver's seat pretending he was too angry to talk. That was not new either. Daniel liked silence when it gave him control. He liked pauses that made other people nervous. He liked making me explain things I had not done just so he could judge the explanation. But for months by then, I had stopped moving the way he expected me to move. So I kept the phone low, screen dimmed, and let it capture everything. His tone, his words, the location ping, the click of the lock, even the rain. I remember looking down at the red recording line and feeling something settle in me. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Just certainty. Then I walked. Not far. Maybe 40 yards. Just enough to get clear of the road and stand under the rusted overhang of the closed station, where the concrete was cracked and the old ice machine hummed like it might still be alive. Rain began coming down harder, tapping against the metal roof in uneven bursts. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled low and steady. I took off one shoe and then the other. My feet were shaking a little, though the rest of me felt oddly calm. I set both heels neatly beside me, opened my bag, and took out the small gray thermos I had packed earlier that afternoon. That detail always surprises people when I tell this story. Yes, I had packed a thermos. No, it was not because I planned to be abandoned on the side of the road exactly like that. But I had learned enough by then to prepare for evenings with Daniel the way some people prepare for power outages. Quietly. Practically. Without announcing it. Inside the thermos was black coffee. Still warm. I poured some into the lid, held it in both hands, and listened to the rain. There is a certain kind of marriage where you become a witness long before you become a wife again in your own mind. You observe more than you participate. You keep track of tone, timing, bank notifications, inconsistencies, names mentioned too casually, stories repeated with slight changes. You learn what mood sits behind a certain way of putting down a fork. You learn what version of him will walk through the door by the speed of his footsteps in the hall. And if you stay long enough, you learn something else too. Men like Daniel rarely become cruel all at once. They become cruel in layers. First, he had corrected my opinions in front of friends. Then he had started calling me forgetful when I remembered things perfectly. Then came money, which he said was just easier for one person to manage. Then came the little rewrites of reality. You're emotional. That never happened. You agreed to this. I'm trying to help you. Why do you always make things difficult? When we first married, I was working full-time as a compliance analyst for a regional healthcare network. It was good work. Careful work. The kind that required detail, patience, and the ability to spot patterns other people missed. I was good at it too. Very good. But Daniel never described it that way. To him, my job was paperwork. Administrative. Replaceable. He said his work was the one that mattered because his name was on contracts and conference panels and donor boards and photographs in business journals. He built commercial properties. He liked saying he built things. It made him sound substantial. What he really built, over time, was dependence. When his company began growing, he told me it would be better for both of us if I stepped back. Less stress. More flexibility. More support at home. He said we were becoming visible in the city and visibility came with expectations. He said that like it was an honor. I should say this clearly now, because I could not say it clearly then. When someone slowly narrows your life and calls it care, the damage is harder to spot. You do not always notice the cage when it is decorated like stability. By the last 2 years of our marriage, Daniel handled all major accounts. He preferred I use one credit card for simplicity. He made comments about what I wore before his work events. He disliked my closest friend because she filled my head. He never forbade anything directly. That was not his style. He just made resistance expensive. A ruined evening. A week of coldness. A speech about loyalty. A look in public that told me I had misstepped. And because he almost never raised his voice, people would not have called it abuse. That word makes some listeners uncomfortable. I understand that. It used to make me uncomfortable too. I thought abuse had to look obvious. Loud. Messy. Visible from the street. I know better now. I stood under that metal awning in the rain and watched water run in dirty ribbons over the concrete. My hair was starting to come loose at the back of my neck. A truck passed once on the highway beyond the trees, then another. The whole place smelled like wet dust and old gasoline. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Not a call. A text. You made this happen. I looked at the message for maybe 3 seconds, then locked the screen without replying. That part mattered too, because old Elena would have responded. She would have written something careful, something that tried to calm him down or pull the night back into shape. She would have explained that correcting him at dinner had not been disrespectful. She would have reminded him I only answered a direct question from another couple at the table. She would have said she was sorry the conversation became awkward when I mentioned the property transfer I thought had already closed, not knowing he had apparently been lying about it for weeks. But the woman standing under that awning with wet feet and a thermos in her hand had stopped doing that kind of work for him. I had already been doing another kind of work instead. Quiet work. Private work. The kind no one saw because no one had ever really imagined I was capable of it. That may sound dramatic, but it wasn't. It was paperwork mostly. Copies, dates, screenshots, notes, recorded conversations. Questions asked twice in two different ways. A file hidden where he would never think to look because he did not believe I had the discipline to build one. That was his mistake. He had spent years underestimating me because it made him feel larger. And I had spent those same years learning exactly how that kind of man leaves traces. Another car approached them, slower this time, headlights cutting across the rain in a wide, pale sweep. It turned off the access road and rolled toward the old station before stopping beneath the edge of the overhang. I did not move until I saw the driver's side door open. Then I let out a breath I had been holding for months. My brother-in-law, Simon, stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, umbrella already opening over his head. He was not actually a bodyguard, not in the formal sense, though Daniel used to sneer and call him that because Simon had spent 12 years doing executive protection work before retiring into private security consulting. To me, in that moment, he was something much simpler. He was the person I had trusted to believe me. He crossed the wet concrete in a dark jacket and work boots, his expression changing when he saw I was barefoot. "You got the recording?" he asked. I held up the phone. Every word. He nodded once, not surprised. He had expected that answer. Then he looked past me toward the road Daniel had taken, as if measuring distance, timing, and consequences all at once. Behind him, a woman leaned across from the passenger seat and pushed the door open. Her name was Nora Vance. She was an attorney I had met only twice before that week, and both times she had spoken to me in the steady tone of someone who preferred facts over comfort. She held out a folded towel and a plastic envelope. "Before anything else," she said, "put your shoes in this. Don't wipe them off." I stared at her for half a second. She gave me the smallest nod. "Wet gravel, roadside residue, location confirmation. Keep everything exactly as it is." That was the moment the night stopped being only humiliation and became evidence. Rain ran off the umbrella in steady lines. I slipped my shoes into the envelope one at a time. My hands were cold, but not clumsy. Not anymore. Simon took the thermos from the ledge and handed it back to me like it was something worth keeping. Nora opened the rear door of the car. "We need to go now," she said. "And Elena, when we get to the hotel, I want you to write down the exact order of events before you sleep. Not the emotional version. The factual one. Time, place, words, weather, route, dinner, text." I nodded. Then I got into the car. As we pulled away, I looked once through the rain-smeared glass at the dark station, the cracked concrete, the place where Daniel thought he had finally reduced me to something small and stranded and ashamed. What he did not understand was that by the time he drove off, I was already no longer alone. And by morning, he was going to learn something he should have asked years earlier. He had never actually known who he was married to. I didn't sleep that night. The hotel room was quiet in a way my house had not been in years. Not because there had been noise before, but because silence in our home had always felt conditional. Like it belonged to Daniel. Like it could shift at any moment depending on his mood, his schedule, or what he decided I had done wrong that day. This silence was different. It was steady. The room itself was small. A narrow bed, a soft beige chair by the window, a desk with a lamp that cast a clean circle of light. My damp dress hung in the bathroom, carefully draped over the towel rack. My shoes, still sealed in the plastic envelope, rested on the desk beside my phone. I sat there for a long time writing. Not feelings. Not interpretations. Just facts. Time we left the restaurant. What was said in the car. The exact route he took. The tone of his voice. The text message. The weather. The distance marker on the road sign I had noticed when we slowed down. I wrote everything the way I used to write compliance reports. Clean. Structured. Verifiable. Around 3:20 a.m., I stopped, read it once, and placed the pages inside the folder Nora had given me earlier. She had labeled it already. Just my initials on the corner. No unnecessary detail. Then I turned off the lamp and lay down. I didn't cry. That part still surprises people. But the truth is, I had already done most of my grieving long before that night. Not for the marriage exactly, but for the version of it I had tried to believe in. The version where control was just stress, where dismissiveness was just personality, where isolation was temporary, where things would balance out if I was patient enough. That version had been gone for a while. The next morning, my phone showed 6 missed calls from Daniel. 3 texts. Where are you? This has gone far enough. Call me. Now. I read them while sitting on the edge of the bed, then set the phone face down and didn't respond. Instead, I called Nora. She picked up on the second ring. Good, she said, before I even spoke. You're awake. I didn't sleep, I replied. That's fine. You don't need to be rested. You need to be clear. That was how she spoke. Direct. No softness unless it served a purpose. We're meeting at 9, she continued. Simon's already here. Bring everything you wrote. And Elena. I waited. From this point forward, no direct communication with him unless I say so. Not even to correct something small. Silence is part of the structure now. I understood exactly what she meant. Silence, when used deliberately, changes the shape of a situation. For years, my silence had been interpreted as agreement or confusion or weakness. Now it was something else entirely. By the time I reached the lobby, Simon was already there, seated near the window with a laptop open and a coffee he hadn't touched. He stood when he saw me, scanning my face the way people in his line of work do, not for emotion, but for stability. You're steady, he asked. Yes. He nodded once. That was enough for him. Nora arrived a few minutes later, carrying a thin leather portfolio and a stack of printed documents secured with a black clip. She didn't waste time on greetings. We're moving faster than I expected, she said, sitting down across from us. Which is good. Last night gives us leverage, but it's only one piece. She looked at me. I need to understand the full structure of your marriage, not the emotional version. The operational one. I knew exactly what she was asking. So I told her. I told her how Daniel had gradually taken over all financial accounts. How simplifying things had turned into me having access to only one shared card with a fixed monthly limit. How I stopped receiving direct statements 2 years ago because he said digital consolidation was more efficient. I told her about the forms I had signed without reading fully. Not because I was careless, but because I had been trained, slowly, to trust his summaries more than my own instincts. I told her about the property discussions he often had on the phone in another room. About the deals that seemed to close and then restructure. About the way numbers never quite matched when I asked simple questions. And I told her about the night 3 months earlier when I logged into what I thought was still our joint account and realized it no longer was. Nora didn't interrupt. She wrote a few notes, occasionally asking for a date or a specific phrasing. Simon, meanwhile, pulled up something on his laptop and turned the screen slightly toward us. This is from last week, he said. It was security footage. Not from the hotel. From my house. The angle was from the hallway leading to Daniel's office. I recognized the frame immediately. Clean walls. Dark wood door. The painting we had bought together 5 years ago, slightly crooked the way it always was. Daniel appeared in the frame, speaking on his phone. He looked relaxed. Comfortable. No, she doesn't know, he was saying. She signs what I put in front of her. That's the point. I felt something in my chest tighten, but I didn't react outwardly. I had heard variations of that tone before. The difference now was that it was no longer just my memory against his denial. It was recorded, documented, real. Simon paused the video. There's more, he said quietly. Nora didn't look surprised. Of course there is, she replied. Then she turned back to me. Elena, I'm going to ask you something very directly, and I need an honest answer. I met her eyes. Do you believe your husband has been moving assets without your knowledge or consent? Yes. The word came out without hesitation. Not because I wanted it to be true. Because I had already seen enough to know it was. Nora nodded slightly, as if confirming something in her own timeline. Good, she said. Because that's where this is going. She opened her portfolio and slid a document toward me. It was a financial summary. Clean columns. Account numbers partially redacted. Dates. Transfers. I read the first page once. Then again. Small amounts at first. Spread out. easy to ignore if you weren't looking closely. Then larger ones, different accounts, different entities, some domestic, some international. The pattern was careful, intentional. This isn't random, Nora said. It's structured movement. He's creating distance between original sources and final holdings. I looked at the dates. Some of them overlapped with times Daniel had told me we were tight on liquidity. Others matched weeks where he had criticized my spending over things as small as groceries. I felt something shift again inside me. Not anger. Clarity. He's been planning something, I said. Yes, Nora replied. And he's been doing it under the assumption that you wouldn't notice or wouldn't understand what you were seeing. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was consistent. Daniel had always underestimated the parts of me that didn't perform for him. He had never asked what I used to do in detail. He had never sat with me long enough to understand how I processed information, how I tracked inconsistencies, how I remembered patterns. He had reduced me to a role. And then he had trusted that version of me to stay exactly where he left it. That was his second mistake. The first had been leaving me on that road. Nora gathered the papers back into her folder. Here's what happens next, she said. We do not confront him. Not yet. We expand documentation. We confirm scope. We build a timeline that holds up in a room where he cannot talk his way out of it. She looked at Simon. I want full access logs from the house system. Entry points. Visitors. Late night activity. Simon nodded, already pulling it. Then she looked at me again. And I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Calm. Observant. No sudden changes in behavior that would alert him. I considered that for a moment. He already thinks I'm reacting emotionally, I said. Good, Nora replied. Let him keep thinking that. There was a brief pause. Then she added, more quietly, men like your husband rely on predictability. Not their own. Yours. I understood. For years, my reactions had followed a pattern he could anticipate. Apologize. Explain. Withdraw. Adjust. Now, for the first time, that pattern was gone. And he didn't know what was replacing it. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out what Nora called points of exposure. Not confrontation points. Not emotional turning points. Structural ones. Places where truth, once revealed, could not be reshaped by explanation. Financial records. Recorded statements. Third-party confirmations. Timeline inconsistencies. Each piece on its own might be dismissed. Together, they form something else. By the time we stood up to leave, the morning had fully settled into the city. People moved through the lobby with normal routines. Coffee cups, phone calls, conversations about meetings and schedules. Everything looked ordinary. That was the strange part. Because underneath that ordinary surface, something had already started shifting. As we walked toward the exit, my phone buzzed again in my bag. I didn't check it. Not immediately. Outside, the air smelled clean after the storm. The sky was pale, almost clear. For a moment, I stood there, just breathing, feeling the quiet steadiness of it. Then I took out my phone. Another message from Daniel. This time longer. You're overreacting. Come home and we'll talk like adults. Don't make this bigger than it is. I read it once. Then I locked the screen again. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't trying to make things smaller anymore. I was letting them become exactly what they already were. I didn't go home that day. Or the next. Daniel kept calling. The pattern was almost predictable once I stopped reacting to it emotionally. First came control. Call me. Now. Then irritation. This isn't funny. Then the shift into reason. We need to talk like adults. Then the first hint of pressure. People are asking where you are. And finally, the one he always used when he felt himself losing ground. You're making this worse than it is. I watched the messages come in without responding. Not because I was trying to punish him. That part is important. I wasn't interested in emotional retaliation anymore. I was observing. When you stop answering, people tell you more about themselves than they intend to. By the third day, the tone changed again. Where are you staying? That was the first real question. Not concern. Not apology. Information. I put the phone face down on the desk in the hotel room and let it sit there. The screen dimmed, then went dark. Across from me, Simon had turned the room into something that looked less like a temporary stay and more like a quiet operations space. His laptop was open, cables running neatly to a portable drive, multiple folders labeled with dates and times. Nora sat in the chair near the window, reviewing documents, occasionally marking something with a pen before setting it aside. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of electronics and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "We're getting a clearer picture," Nora said finally, without looking up. "But we need one more layer before we move." "What kind of layer?" I asked. "Intent," she replied. "Not just what he did. What he planned to do." I understood the difference immediately. Evidence of action could be explained away, reframed, minimized. Intent was harder to reshape once it was visible. Simon turned his screen slightly toward us. "I pulled full access logs from the house," he said. "Not just entry points. Internal movement sensors, too." On the screen was a timeline. Dates. Times. Motion triggers. At first, it looked like normal activity. Doors opening. Hallway movement. Office use. Then patterns began to show. Late nights. Repeated entries into Daniel's office long after I had gone to bed. And then something else. A second device signature. Consistent. Recurring. "Someone else has been in the house regularly," Simon said. I didn't feel surprise. Not exactly. I had suspected something for a while. Small things. A glass out of place. A faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine. The way Daniel would suddenly insist on working late at home instead of at the office. But suspicion is different from confirmation. "Can you identify who?" Nora asked. Simon nodded once. "Working on it." There was a brief silence. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. Not to respond. To read. A new message from Daniel. "You left your ring here." I looked down at my hand. Bare. I hadn't even noticed when I took it off. Sometime between the car and the hotel, I must have slipped it into my bag without thinking. I opened the side pocket. There it was. A simple band. White gold. Clean. Unremarkable unless you knew what it represented. I held it in my palm for a moment. Then I placed it on the desk, next to the sealed envelope with my shoes. Objects have a way of holding truth more honestly than people do. That ring had once meant commitment. Now it was just evidence of duration. Nothing more. "Don't respond," Nora said quietly, watching me. "I'm not," I replied. She nodded. "Good. He's trying to pull you back into a familiar pattern. Don't give him that." I set the phone aside again. Simon's laptop made a soft notification sound. He leaned forward, scanning the screen. "Got something," he said. We both looked up. He clicked open a file. Security footage again. This time from inside the house, but a different angle. The living room. Daniel stood near the bar, pouring a drink. Across from him, sitting casually on the edge of the sofa, was a woman I recognized immediately. Her name was Lila Mercer. She worked for Daniel. Officially, she was part of his administrative team. Organized. Efficient. Always present at events, always just slightly behind him, managing details, schedules, logistics. I had met her dozens of times. I had trusted her. On the screen, she was wearing one of my robes. Not by accident. Not by necessity. By assumption. The two of them were laughing. Relaxed. Comfortable in a way that did not require explanation. I watched the footage without speaking. Daniel handed her a glass. She took it, leaned back slightly, and said something I couldn't hear. He responded with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Simon paused the video. "That's not all," he said. He clicked forward. Another clip. Different night. Same room. This time, Daniel was speaking more clearly. "It's already structured," he was saying. "By the time she figures anything out, it won't matter." Lila tilted her head slightly. "And if she does figure it out?" Daniel shrugged. "She won't know what to do with it." There it was. Not just action. Not just secrecy. Intent. Clear. Calm. Assumed. I felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger. Not even betrayal in the way people expect. Those feelings had already passed through me in quieter moments weeks before. What I felt now was something cleaner: recognition. He had never seen me as someone capable of understanding the systems he operated within. He had never imagined I would document, organize, and wait. He had built his entire plan around that assumption. And now that assumption was about to fail him. Nora closed her folder slowly. "This changes the timing," she said. "How?" I asked. "We don't wait for him to make the next move," she replied. "We're close enough now to act." Simon nodded. "Agreed." Nora looked at me. "Before we move forward, I need to be absolutely certain of one thing." I held her gaze. "You're ready for this to unfold publicly," she said. "Not dramatically, not emotionally, but structurally. Once this starts, it doesn't go back to private negotiation." I understood exactly what she meant. There would be no quiet conversation over a table, no apology that reset things, no controlled narrative. This would move into spaces where facts mattered more than tone, where records spoke louder than explanations, where other people would see what had been happening behind closed doors. I thought about the last 11 years, the small corrections, the gradual narrowing, the quiet dismissals, the way I had been reduced, piece by piece, into someone easier to manage. Then I thought about the road, the rain, the way he had looked at me when he told me to get out, like I had nowhere else to go. "I'm ready," I said. Nora nodded once. "Good." She reached into her folder and pulled out a document. "Then this is where it begins." I looked down at it. Not a letter, not a message, a filing, formal, structured, precise, the kind of document that didn't argue. It established. "This initiates protective measures," Nora said. "Financial, legal, and personal. It also locks certain accounts and flags irregular activity." Simon closed his laptop halfway. "And once it's filed," he added, "he won't be able to move anything without it being visible." I ran my fingers lightly over the edge of the paper. It felt solid, real. Not like the conversations I had been having for years that shifted depending on who was speaking. This was different. This didn't rely on persuasion. It relied on fact. "When?" I asked. Nora checked her watch. "In less than 2 hours." There was a quiet stillness in the room after that. Not tension, not fear, just the kind of pause that comes right before something irreversible begins. My phone buzzed again. I didn't pick it up this time. I didn't need to, because for the first time since I had met Daniel, I was no longer reacting to his actions. I was ahead of them. And very soon, he was going to realize that the version of me he had built his entire life around never actually existed. The filing happened at 11:12 a.m. I remember the exact time because Nora said it out loud as she pressed submit, not dramatically, just as a confirmation. 11:12, it's active. Nothing changed in the room immediately. There was no sound, no visible shift, no sense of impact. But systems had moved. Accounts had been flagged. Internal reviews triggered. Notifications sent to places Daniel did not control. That was the difference between how he operated and how this worked. He relied on privacy. This relied on visibility. We didn't go back to the hotel after that. Instead, we drove downtown to a building Daniel knew very well. Glass exterior, polished lobby, quiet reception desk with 2 assistants who always recognized him before he even reached the counter. His firm occupied the entire 14th floor. I had only been there a handful of times over the years, always as a guest, always slightly out of place, always aware that the version of me he presented in that space was curated. Today felt different, not because I belonged there, but because I no longer needed to. As we stepped out of the elevator, I noticed the small details first. The way conversations softened when people saw me, the quick glances, the subtle recalculations. Daniel had told people I was taking time off, that I preferred not to be involved in the complexity of his work. That narrative had held. Until now. The receptionist stood up when she saw us. "Elena," she said carefully. "I wasn't expecting, that's all right," Nora interrupted gently. "We won't need an appointment." Her tone wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. There is a certain kind of authority that doesn't raise its voice. It just proceeds. We walked past the desk, down the hallway, toward Daniel's office. The door was closed. I could hear his voice inside. Sharp. Controlled. On a call. Nora didn't knock. She opened the door. Daniel turned immediately. For a brief second, I saw something I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Not irritation. Not even surprise. Disruption. The kind that comes when a system you believed was stable shifts without warning. "Elena," he said, standing up slowly. "What is this?" His eyes moved from me to Nora, then to Simon, measuring, recalculating. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Nora stepped forward slightly. "My name is Nora Vance," she said. "I represent Elena Brooks." Daniel's expression tightened just enough for me to notice. "I don't know what you think this is," he replied, his tone smoothing out again, "but this is not the place for it. It is exactly the place," Nora said calmly. She placed a folder on his desk. Not forcefully, just enough to make it clear it wasn't optional. "This is formal notice," she continued. "Effective immediately." Daniel didn't touch the folder right away. He looked at me instead. "This is unnecessary," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Whatever you think is happening, I'm not thinking," I said quietly. That was the first time I had spoken since entering the room. The words were simple, but they shifted something. Because for years, he had positioned me as someone who misunderstood, who reacted, who misread situations. "I'm not thinking," I repeated. "I'm documenting." There was a pause. Small, but noticeable. Then he reached for the folder. Opened it. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. Then he stopped. Just for a second. Simon stepped slightly to the side, opening his laptop on a nearby surface. Nora continued, her tone steady. "Financial accounts have been flagged for irregular activity. Transfers are under review. Access points have been logged. And additional documentation has been secured." Daniel closed the folder. Carefully. Like the movement itself might restore some control. "This is a misunderstanding," he said again. "You've taken partial information and built a narrative around it." Nora didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned the laptop screen slightly toward him. Simon pressed play. The video filled the silence. His voice. Clear. Unfiltered. "She signs what I put in front of her. That's the point." I watched his face as he heard it. The shift was immediate. Not dramatic, but real. The space he usually occupied, confident, composed, slightly above the situation, began to narrow. "That's taken out of context," he said quickly. Another clip. "By the time she figures anything out, it won't matter." He looked at me then. Not the way he used to. Not dismissive. Not correcting. Assessing. Trying to understand what I knew. How much? From where? That was the moment. The room changed. Not because I raised my voice. Not because I confronted him. But because for the first time, he didn't control the version of reality being presented. Nora stepped in again. "There's more," she said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The implication was enough. Daniel's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it. Then again. The second time, his hand moved. He picked it up. Read something. His expression shifted again. Faster this time. Less controlled. "What is this?" he said, looking up. Nora didn't ask. He answered anyway. "Accounts are frozen," he said. "Pending review." "Yes," Nora replied. "As I mentioned." "That's not possible," he said. "You can't just—" "We didn't," she said calmly. "The system did." That was the difference. He was used to controlling outcomes through conversation, influence, positioning. This wasn't that. This was structure, process, documentation, things that didn't respond to tone. His phone buzzed again, then again. Each time, his composure thinned slightly. I stood there quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because this part was never about what I said. It was about what could no longer be denied. A knock came at the door behind us. Soft, measured. Before Daniel could respond, it opened. 2 men stepped in. Suits. Neutral expressions. Professional. Not familiar. That alone was enough to tell me they weren't part of his world. "Mr. Brooks," one of them said, "we need a moment of your time." Daniel stared at them. "This isn't a good time," he replied. "It's the only time," the man said evenly. There was no aggression in his voice, just certainty. Daniel looked back at me, then at Nora, then at the folder. For the first time in 11 years, he didn't have a response ready. He didn't have a way to reframe the situation. He didn't have a softer version of events to present, because the room had already seen it. Not emotionally, not dramatically, structurally. And structure doesn't argue. It reveals. I picked up my bag. There was nothing else I needed to do there. As I turned to leave, Daniel spoke. "Elena." I stopped, but I didn't turn back immediately. That pause mattered. When I finally did, his expression had shifted again. Not to anger. Not fully, but something closer to urgency. "This isn't over," he said. I looked at him for a moment. Then I nodded slightly. "You're right," I said calmly. And then I walked out, because for the first time, I wasn't part of his version of events anymore. I was part of the record. The calls started before I even reached the car. Not from Daniel. From other people. Numbers I recognized. Some I didn't. Colleagues of his. A mutual acquaintance from a charity board. Someone from a bank I hadn't spoken to in over a year. I let them ring. Simon opened the passenger door for me, and I sat down slowly, placing my bag on my lap, my phone still vibrating softly in my hand. For a moment, I just watched the screen light up again and again. Then I turned it off completely. Silence, when it's chosen, feels different. We didn't speak much during the drive back. There was no need. Everything that needed to happen had already started. And unlike the life I had been living before, none of it depended on whether Daniel understood it or agreed with it. By late afternoon, the situation had moved beyond him. That's the part people don't always realize. Control works very well inside private spaces, inside conversations, inside relationships where one person defines the reality and the other tries to keep up. But once things move into systems, legal, financial, institutional, control becomes harder to perform. Because those systems don't respond to tone. They respond to records. By the next morning, there were formal inquiries. Not dramatic ones. Quiet ones. Requests for documentation. Clarifications. Internal reviews. The kind that don't raise alarms publicly at first, but start tightening around inconsistencies. Daniel tried to reach me again. This time, he left a voicemail. "Elena, we need to fix this before it gets out of hand." His voice was different, still controlled, but thinner, less certain. I listened to it once. Then I saved it, not because I needed to hear it again, but because everything now had a place, a purpose. Nothing was wasted anymore. Over the next few days, the narrative he had built around himself began to shift. Not collapse. Not all at once. But it started to fracture. A meeting he was supposed to lead was postponed, then quietly reassigned. A client requested clarification on something minor. Another asked for a full review. Lila stopped coming into the office. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. That's how these things usually happen. Not with public declarations, but with quiet withdrawals. People step back, distance themselves, reassess, because credibility, once questioned, doesn't hold the same weight. And Daniel had built his entire life on the assumption that his credibility was untouchable. I stayed in the hotel for another week, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because it gave me space, clarity, distance from the version of myself that had existed inside that house. During that time, Nora handled communication. Everything went through her. Requests, responses, boundaries. I didn't need to negotiate anymore. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to soften anything to make it easier for him to accept. That responsibility had been quietly placed on me for years, and I had finally set it down. Simon checked in regularly, not just about logistics, about me. "You're holding steady," he said one evening, leaning against the doorframe. "I am," I replied. He nodded. That's what matters. It did, because this wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving something loudly or publicly. It was about no longer carrying something that had been distorting my life for years. about stepping out of a system that depended on my silence, about letting things become visible in the places where visibility mattered. A few days later, I went back to the house. Not to stay, just to collect what was mine. The place felt different. Not physically, but structurally. Like something that had once held weight no longer did. I moved through it slowly. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway where the camera had been. Daniel wasn't there. I didn't ask where he was. I didn't need to. Upstairs, in the bedroom, I opened the drawer where I had kept my things. Some of them were gone. Not taken. Just displaced. As if someone had been using the space without understanding what it held. I gathered what remained. Clothes. Documents. A small wooden box with personal items I hadn't touched in months. And then I saw it. The ring. Placed on the dresser. Exactly where he said it would be. I picked it up. Held it in my hand for a moment. There was no surge of emotion. No sudden sadness. Just recognition. This had been a symbol once. Then it became an expectation. Then a quiet wait. Now it was just an object. I placed it in the box, closed the lid, and left it there. Some things don't need to be carried forward. Outside, the air was clear. The storm from that night felt far away now. Not because it hadn't mattered, but because it had done exactly what storms do. It revealed what wasn't stable. In the weeks that followed, the process continued. Not fast, not dramatic, but steady. There were formal consequences. Financial reviews that didn't resolve in his favor. Partnerships that quietly ended. Positions that were no longer offered. Conversations that no longer included him. And through all of it, I stayed where I was. Not physically, but mentally. I didn't return to the old patterns. I didn't respond to attempts to reframe the situation. I didn't step back into the role he had assigned me. Because once you see clearly, it's very hard to pretend you don't. People asked me later if I felt satisfied, if I felt like I had won. I never answered that the way they expected, because this wasn't about winning. It was about alignment. About the truth finally existing in the same space as the story. About no longer being reduced to something smaller just to keep things functioning. A month after everything began, I moved into a new place. Nothing extravagant. Just quiet. Simple. Mine. The first night there, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, this time in a real mug, not a thermos, and listened to the city settle into evening. No tension. No waiting for the sound of a door opening. No adjusting. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Strength isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself in moments of conflict. It shows up in the decisions you make quietly, in the things you stop accepting, in the way you prepare, even when no one is watching, in the moment you stop explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. Daniel thought he was teaching me a lesson that night, but the truth is I had already learned it, long before the rain, long before the road, long before he told me to get out of the car. I just hadn't acted on it yet. Now I had. And I didn't need him or anyone else to confirm what that meant. Because for the first time in a long time, my life wasn't something I was trying to hold together. It was something I finally understood how to build.